can all be good.
Exactly. So, as in life, as in psychotherapy, we almost on a regular basis come to this disappointment in life. Like, you are so different. I thought you were different. And well, when I got the menu, this is not what I ordered. So can I send it back? Because no, sorry. You have to deal with it. And also, I don't like everything about you necessarily either. So that's when the I and the you become an us, meaning something has to die, something's got to give. And that's painful. And that's right in the power zone of the 8th house. It's like a snake shedding skin, you know, it's very painful. So the old skin is unsightly and, you know, it doesn't look too good. And beneath is a new sort of layer growing, but that's still subtle and, you know, and it has to be protected, tender, exactly. Yeah. And that's how we humans also go about in our everyday lives all the time, but we don't show it necessarily. We do our utmost to say, no, I'm cool with that. No, I mean, And coming to terms with that is so painful. And on the other hand, so necessary in order to go on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant place to explore. And I think once you can kind of understand that that's what's going to happen, that it is a natural piece of the process, things can get really good. So hold on just a second. If you're listening, if you're tuning in, you're actually like not coming in the middle. It was just too good. We got started early. Welcome everybody to today's Eat and Green, where I've found another international friend and we've gotten connected to another astrologer, and it's just been divine. Martin, you're just what a joy, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, to be sure.
Oh, good. Well, we have just become like fast friends, and the conversation, it really is. I feel like every time we get on, it just gets good right away. You know, it's like, how are you? How's the cat? And we're in. Which is divine. So today, if you're joining us, we're going to be here for, about 30-45 minutes together, something like that. Just we want to talk about the 8th house, and Martin has written an absolutely divine book exploring the 8th house. And this can be complicated. It can be a complicated house. There's a lot that goes in it. There's a lot that goes into being in the 8th house and the experiences that come out of it. So we're going to just have a little conversation and exploration of this space today, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And I love one of the things we were just talking about, if you were kind of tuning in at the beginning there, is how much shame and guilt can go into our placements in the 8th house. And, one of the things I've really gotten to learn for myself as a Venus at 0 degrees Aries in the 8th house is that, yes, I know, opposing my Mars at 0 degrees Libra. But one of these ideas, especially as I was older, it came from when I was much younger, and I had decided that in a very Venus way, even though I knew I was probably going to be an attractive figure that walked into the room because I am aggressively fashionable and I am aggressively friendly, that was somehow unacceptable. I had decided and told, the core belief formation of the 8th house, that was unacceptable, except that, in just, this is just one example, but in that way, every time I would work against it, a piece of me would feel sick and feel shadowed and feel less than, and I'd have to play the shame game and go all the way down that road. And so, you know, a big piece for me in learning about my specific things in the eighth house and how I help people is this is an area I needed to have transformation for myself, to have freedom and the depth of the experience here, but that also by learning the opposite side of that, I could help other people. So I am a big fan, and can draw to me people who struggle with insecurity of their bodies and of their physical presence in the world and with others. And I love that. I love that today, because today, half the time I walk into the room and I'm definitely the person in the red lipstick with the leather boots up to my eyeballs and the gold belt. And I love that about me today, but it is a piece, a small piece of the shadow of the eighth house that I'm not so afraid of anymore, because like you said, I own that piece of my shadow today. And as I integrate and live, that's very authentic. It's very honest. It is moving humility and vulnerability on display for other people. And then they have permission to do the same. And it has changed my life to own and live opposite of a core story that I told myself for a very long time. You know, I would be guilty for stepping out and shining. And that's not what I believe today.
I agree. And you've touched on several very, very typical eighth house issues. For example, boundary crossings, guilt, coming to terms with your shadow. And also the eighth house isn't a nice house. It's an intense house. It's not so, you're nice. So it's not a fun house like the third or the fifth. And interestingly enough, both the fifth and the eighth house have to do with sexuality. But in the fifth house, it has a sort of cheeky, playful, narcissistic way. And okay, do you like me? I like you. I'm gorgeous. Am I not? While in the eighth house, it's like, okay, let's talk business. Let's get to the real issues, because that's the house of intimacy. And particularly if you have, and I have a Venus, an Aries Venus in the eighth house as well. So there we go, presto, we have another thing in common. I'm not surprised though, I mean, obviously. And to be drawn to a sort of aesthetic which has a wee bit of a whiff of tragedy, of decay, of decadence, if you will, which isn't common ground for all the other Venuses and all the other signs and houses. But if you play by the rule of the others, you would be the nice little kid, you would be like the decent girl, the decent boy, and you would feel like hell. So there is nothing better to do than to say, I'm better off with, you know, I mean, like out of 10 encounters, like 2 say, I don't like you, you are nasty, you're all over the place, you're too inquisitive, you're wrong. But 8 out of 10 would say, I like you because you're very authentic, I can relate to you. And that's the power of the 8th house. But also, I mean, as you described, you had to overcome a certain shyness, a certain being, I'm different, and I want to be different, but still, I mean, Venus wants acceptance, and Venus wants the response of, I like you. You know, it's a social planet, and our Venus always likes to say, hello, I'm so-and-so. And particularly if it's an Aries one, which is really like, hello, who are you? I'd like to play with you. And of course, many people would say, oh, okay, interesting, and just walk away and not feel hurt and let down, but to say, okay, just that was obviously the wrong choice. Yeah. But I'll soldier on and go to the next person at a party and say, hello, I'm Martin, who are you? And at some point, you stick with that person you can relate to. And rather than doing chit chat and superficial blah, 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 you end up with sharing intimate, fascinating stories. And each of you will leave the room richer and more powerful, because the 8th house is also a house of energy exchange. So it's like, I give you something, but I want something in return. And you can well imagine that that's often off balance. And that's, I told you, I do a lot of work as a couple therapist. And the most common issue is that couples come and their balance is absolutely off.
Sure.
So they have issues like, you never told me this, or you did that to me, I'm holding a grudge, I can never forgive you, and so on and so forth. And you know, just like peel off an onion to deal with all these issues. I mean, if you sort of like turn an 8 to a horizontal position, you would have a vicious circle. Mm-hmm. Or a roller coaster. And that's what happens in therapy. So I always tell my clients, like, not you, each others are the enemies, but your toxic pattern is the enemy. Right. And we have to deal with that. And on the surface, it's this, you know, punching back, passive aggressiveness. But if you peel away that, it's always like guilt, shame, and a profound need to be reassured. And this dealing with the I and the you become an us. Mm-hmm. Is a very, very painful process, if you will. And also, I mean, if you look back at history, I mean, for thousands of years, people married for financial reasons. And the concept of marrying out of romantic need is relatively new, like, well, 100, 150 years tops. And what our society is often doing is this sort of, oh, the right person is out there for you, and he or she will make you whole. And that's, of course, utter bullshit, because if you cannot love yourself, as RuPaul says, how the hell can you love anybody else? So it all comes back to you. So the other person serves as a sort of mirror, and what you project onto them, they will give you back. Yeah. Like, I hate you, and you will say, yeah, you know, I hate you back double. So there you are. Yeah. And to end up, let's say, okay, guys, let's start with where you started. And that was often like, I saw something in you, and I was so full of hope, and I opened up to you, and you hurt me. And to sort of heal that mm-hmm. is very painful. But after that's done, because the 8th house can also be a house of closure, if you will, reaffirming, forgiving, and then you can move on. Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, no, I'm just with you all of the way along, because I do think that, you know, this idea of loving myself too, when we talk about the 8th house, I need whatever taboo, shadow, crisis, person, experience is going to come and tap the core beliefs that I have there, tap the vulnerabilities that I have there, so that I can see pieces of myself that can be a part of my fall, as opposed to my phoenix. You know, there's a rise, I think, that is available from the 8th house, but how do I get there if I live through all of the rest of the houses? Well, the universe is divine. It sends something that is intimately tied to me, you know, whether that be another person or finances, whatever it is. It seems like from the 8th house, I'm sent an invitation to engage by something that this is me and this is the other source. And if this source moves, I will respond. I will. Exactly. You know, and it is a cosmic conspiracy to be like, yeah, this part of you too. And that's something we were talking about, especially in ourselves and client work right now, is like having to 8th house. We have to get into the negative, or what we perceive to be negative, the more intense feelings. And walking with people a lot this last couple of years, I know I have been into that, and that it's not wrong. You are not wrong to experience your intensity. That is a vast plane of humanity. And if you want the lightness and you want the flow and you want the freedom and the agility, it has to be in the intensity as well as it's all good.
Exactly. Also, I mean, the 8th house is opposite the 2nd house, and the 2nd house is all about what belongs to me. It's the relationship I have with my own body, if you will, my self-esteem. But in the 8th house, it's the pleasure and pain I encounter with other people. And that's, I mean, that requires courage. And, you know, sexuality is oftentimes a matter of imagination, like sex happens in the brain, if you will. And the French call an orgasm la petite mort, the little death, you see? And if you hark back to Hellenistic astrology in the old cultures, when people were buried, they were buried with a coin placed on their lips or on their eyelids, because the ferryman Charon, who is supposed to deliver the souls to the other world, won't do it for free. So not only have to encounter this journey into the underworld, like, oh, you have to pay someone to deliver you there. So it's like double pain. It's like, oh, okay, because what happens if you don't pay the ferryman or the therapist, if you will, or your husband or whatever?
Today, the deliverers, like the 8th house is going to have another person as a part of your deliverance. We got to get that out there right now. Somebody is showing up for your deliverance.
Exactly. And also, I mean, if you look at the chart, and the ascendant is, you know, where the sun wakes up in the morning in the east, and by the time it's noon, it's the MC, and then it falls through the 9th, and by the time it's in the 8th house, on the one hand side, it's very bright. I mean, in the Mediterranean countries, for example, people do siesta because nobody would do business. It's too boiling hot. So what do? They retire into the shade and coolness of their homes and close the shutters. And there is this 8th house enigma. On the one hand side, it's so bright that you could go blind. And on the other hand, it's shade and shadow. So we have this light and shadow enigma in the 8th house, because normally one would say, well, the 8th house can't be a place of light, but actually it is, but you have to go through the darkness beforehand.
Yeah, and that's why you have the Scorpio energy leading the charge, because Scorpio is not afraid to go to hell and back, because it knows its way back to the light. You know, it's like, yeah, we're going to just go down here, and it's dank, by the way, but we will come back, you know.
I mean, absolutely. And if you look at so many cases where you can't find closure because nobody ever told you how to mourn, if you lose someone or something even, and that's what one does in therapy, for example. So I've done something on the 2nd Saturn return recently, so which is a very apt thing to do, because all the baby boomers now come into their 2nd Saturn return, and they don't have healthy role models, because they come from a place where you retire, you lose everything you hold dear, your attractiveness, your ability to pull through, and so on and so forth. And now a new generation is refusing to fade back into the beige and gray and becoming invisible, and that requires a lot of courage. So what I do with clients oftentimes is okay, let's sit down and do a list. So are there any thingies that you always wanted to do and which are probably too late by now? So you have to let go of them. It's painful, but rather than dream on and then get to the point. So let's have a second look at your list. So is there anything left which would still be possible? And if so, carpe diem, come on, let's do it.
Do it. Yes.
No complaining, because rather than not having tried, you know, just shying away. I mean, who wants on their deathbed complain about, I wasn't daring enough, I never made the extra mile, I never made the extra effort of connecting with that special person or trying to come to terms with that. And you just told me about your husband, that he has certain talents which he not necessarily is proud of, but that's the whole thing. Like, this is what you're good at. This is where your 8th house can obviously shine, and own it, embrace it, because that's what makes you different from other people.
Yes, I know. And isn't that funny? That's really a realization I think I've had over this last decade, is that there's these portions of our chart that are absolutely phenomenally gifted, but I don't think it's impressive enough. But it's like, well, but when I do that area, I feel full. I feel as if I've touched that philosopher's stone in my own life, you know. But it's like this idea that, you know, I'm supposed to just be lit up with majesty and intuition and feel good all the time. And it's like, well, let's go to your 8th house, because some shit doesn't feel good, but I bet it will change your life.
Exactly. Also, I mean, what I find utterly fascinating is that literally all the 3 water houses are very intimate, private. Essentially, they are none of your fucking business houses, if you will. It's like, don't pry, none of your business. Yes. Who are you to ask me this intimidating question? None of your business. You see, but that's where all the good stuff is. It's where we come from. It's where we find peace. It's where we own our shadow, our dreams, because dreams also can be horribly intimidating and shaming, and every kid who is laughed at from its peers knows how painful that is. And that's a sort of Plutonian Scorpio 8th house thingy. If you experience this horrible sensation of being humiliated, of being powerless as an adult, you would go to great length of never to experience that again. You would rather say, I'm large and in charge. Yeah. You see, I'm going to step up my game. Don't you ever dare to laugh at me again. And sometimes that's been taken too far, because sometimes people with a marked 8th house can become vampires, because they live off the energy of other people. Sure. I do believe that all of us know people with whom, if we socialize with them, and after that we feel knackered, we feel drained, and actually we say, hold on, I've just been supporting that person all the time and wasn't even aware of that. Yes. So like really, so it has this sort of vampiric, dried out all my energy, running out empty. And maybe sometimes we have facets of that ourselves. Absolutely. If we are honest.
Yeah, that's the part, is that I feel like the 8th house requires a lot of honesty, because it's like, well, where do I practice my vampiring? You know, yes. What is it that is attempting to transform or needing my attention to transform in this area, that I am actually sucking the life out of other people or myself, even around beliefs? Like, where am I just not as impressive as I think I am? And that's, I think, can be seen in that area. And it's interesting because I know a lot, I've talked about it a lot today, but a lot of this idea of fashion and being in public and being in my body and in my space, for a long time, what it would look like is I would see a woman or I would see a person walk into the room and they're just owning their outfit and their space. And what I would feel was intimidated, right? I would just immediately feel intimidated. But what was coming out of my mouth is, I'm very confident. But what was happening in that don't you pry space was like, oh my God. And it's so great. I heard this woman describe it. She's like, that is what you call pressure. And it is pressure to transform. Like, what is the pressure put on you that you need to go and look at because it's not healthy yet? And I thought, gosh, that's really good. That's really good. Where do I need to? And I feel it the other way now too. When I walk into a room and somebody's like, oh my gosh, I had this awesome experience with this woman. And I could feel I was her pressure. I was like, oh, I didn't mean to be pressured today, but apparently that's our job. And we got to have a conversation. And it turns out she's got this gorgeous voice and Mercury in the 8th house, and so even watching what I was doing was her pressure, and instead of like super backing away, she came and talked to me and we had this wonderful conversation and I got to hear her voice. It was just lovely. But those places, I just think,
I think I hear you, and I think it's all about, of course, I mean, Venus in Aries has a competitive touch to it. I mean, let's face it. So, and in the 8th house, of course, is about overcoming our shame. And, being gay plays a bit into that field as well, because I oftentimes felt that as a gay person, there is nothing I could do right, because this whole, it's a beautiful community and it's so supportive. It's not. It's a lot of pressure going on and all this nonsense about straight acting. So you're only like a good gay if someone would say, oh, you're gay? Oh, no shit. I thought you were straight because you're so masculine. And that's supposed to be a compliment. Whereas on the other hand, I had you down as gay the minute I saw you, which is a sort of like toxic compliment, if you will, wouldn't you agree?
Right.
And over the years and years and years, I actually learned that I couldn't do it right, save off, becoming authentic. And these days, and I know the majority of my work as a therapist is I work with straight men and straight women. And I brilliantly connect with the straight men because they don't feel challenged by me. They can relate to their emotion and also think like, oh, come on, Martin is a jolly chap and he isn't threatening, and he sort of can connect with facets of my masculinity that I would love to be more at ease. And sometimes I feel, well, of course, amongst other gay men, it's relaxed, but also it can be pretty competitive. So there is also, I mean, this struggle of you have to be gorgeous, you have to be witty, you have to be fashionable, blah, blah, blah. And if you remove the sort of likable, jolly, popular, oh, it's all political correct layer, where does one land if one is not gorgeous, if one is not fashionable, if one is not witty, if one, so
what does that mean?
And that's all 8th house. So there are always sort of a sort of contract, and you haven't read the fine print beforehand. And then you say, I'm trapped. So what you're describing, and I can relate with that absolutely, is once coming out of the cocoon, if you will, and reveal who you are. Never mind the 2 out of 10 who will not like you, who will read you, who will be bitchy about you. Always focus on the people who would say, you know what, she's the real thing, he's the real thing.
Yeah, and have people in your corner, you know, and vibe yourself with people in your corner who say, well, why does that bother you? Let's talk about why that bothers you, not fuck her, like exactly. Whatever, we can have enough of that, right? Or you shouldn't go that direction. Like I also have Jupiter in Scorpio though, so I'm kind of a nosy Rosie to the darkness. And I'm like, I enjoy people and that part of us that will invite people into our lives to explore our 8th house tendencies, because that is where I think things get really delicious. Because the fact is I think you can be, you know, just a whole row of authentic sunshine or whatever you are, and truly someone's not going to like you. That just is, I think, what it is. But the intimacy of self with the universe, with understanding how you move, how you groove, where you struggle, where you don't, where you're powerful. I honestly think sometimes, Martin, that from the 8th house, the scariest thing that we ever find out is how good we are at something.
Yes, I agree. And this whole thing about guilt and blame and shame, I always try to reframe that and just offer this, let's talk about responsibility, because at the end of the day, we must be held to account by our deeds. There is no shying away from that. There is no woe is me. It's a, okay, that's what I did. That's what I said. I own it. But to talk about you're guilty is different than, okay, you have to own that in terms of you did that and it's your responsibility. And that's also sort of like this becoming mature or adult. It's not about how you talk, how you dress, blah, blah, blah. It's how about you, you stand for your actions.
Yeah.
Can you stand for them? Yeah. And that's the 8th house.
Yes.
You see? So that's the contract we all sign away. And that's the whole concept of incarnation, if you will, because everything we do, we feel, we say is written in the universe and has consequences. There's no shying away from that. But we can emerge as a more mature, if you will, more grown up, if you will, more responsible, if you will, person. If you say, would I have done it again like that if I had the chance? Probably not, but still, don't do this woe is me stuff, because, you know, it's just own it.
Get a tour guide, therapist, life coach, sponsor, if that's the arena you're in, great counsel, whatever. Get a tour guide so they can just shine the flashlight while you walk.
Yeah.
And we gotta get into the intimate power dynamic with ourself and this divine energy, I think, and that is the most tender, vulnerable, powerful position of work that I think that we're offered through the journey. It's quite true. Sexy, actually. You know, it's really quite sexy, I think.
And I mean, also, I mean, many of my students say, but you know, I don't have any placements in the 8th house. I said, yeah, but still, I mean, you have a ruler of the 8th house, you have transits going through the 8th house, or, you know, with your solar return or secondary progression, what have you. Also, you will always meet someone who will activate, whose planets would fall into your 8th house, and thus, ta-da, hello, 8th house. And these are the encounters where you say, oh my God, that went right under my skin.
Yes.
Not necessarily a pleasant feeling, but it's intense.
Yes. Yeah. And that's so funny, because that's right. It can be intense, because I have walked into some people I will never forget. I walked into a regular old Whole Foods grocery store and walked by this other human being, and I knew I was having an 8th house moment. I was like, whoa, thank you. But also, whoa, please go that way.
Yeah.
That is like a lot, you know, because you're right. It's not always a bad intense. Sometimes it's a, ooh, ooh, I'm still in here kind of intensity.
You know, I was stalked for a year and a half by a former client of mine, and that was so unpleasant. So this lady left me voice messages at night, crying, blaming me, consulting other astrologers, where she said, well, Martin's chart and my chart are in total harmony together. Can't you see that? And she just didn't stop. And everyone told me, well, you have to go to the police or stuff. I said, well, you know, from what I felt, it was, I just have to sit this out. And she will find another person to obsess about, which obviously she did. But I never felt more into the unpleasant realm of the 8th house than during that period, because I thought she's really projecting everything onto me. And just because I was nice, so we had to, you know, I mean, I gave her a reading and, you know, said, okay, if I were you, I would do this or that, and just be friendly, because I'm a friendly person most of the time. And she took it completely the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, holy moly, I'm really up to my eyeballs in trouble. And that's, I don't know what the universe was thinking when offering me that wonderful opportunity of overcoming myself, but I'm pretty sure that it will never happen again. I can't tell you why, but it was like, this was on my shopping list. And I said, oh, okay, that's coming on. Okay, tick in the box, and then done it. Can I go now? Please, can I go now? I've done it.
Yes. Yes. And then there are a couple that I'm like, this is still on the shopping list. Back in we go, you know? Yeah. So sometimes, but I get that feeling too. Like I've had some of those where it is, you know, and you guys listening, have you had that where you've done it and then there's a sense of completion where it's like, got it. Yeah. Very clear. And these other ones where you're like, really? Like I thought I handled that in the 80s. What the heck, you know? So the learning continues.
It does. And if you have any placement at all in the 8th house, or if your ruler of the 8th house is challenged, it oftentimes comes with a good portion of fear, because you just, life feels threatening. Life does not feel like a friendly place. And you sometimes feel you can't live another day under that pressure. I just had a client who suffers from a broken heart, and he sort of was that near to the perfect relationship. And I really had to tell him that life isn't fair, and life doesn't necessarily play out the way we want it. And I wish I could have told him that everything's going to be okay, but that's, you know, that's lying. All I could offer him was this sort of image that now you're feeling really, really low, and it might feel like that a little bit longer, but then you can climb up, and there will be other women, and you will feel elated again, because he's the sort of person, he's a Sagittarius. And particularly people with a lot of fire going on in their charts don't take too kindly to disappointments and the feeling of weakness and not being, you know, stepping up their game, because in their worldview, it's not about being limited, it's not about being frustrated, but it's all about, yay, life's a bowl of cherries, you know, and life is my oyster and stuff like that, which is true, but only partly. I mean,
it's as true as it is, as long as it is, and then some other things, right? Yeah, brilliant.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, you've got this gorgeous book that is out and wonderfully ready for the people. So where can people find it? Oh, look at this cover. Look at that.
So can you see that? So
Pandora's
it's called
Box.
Pandora's Box, the Mysterious Eighth House. And that's my name, Martin Sebastian Moritz, and you can get it everywhere. So you can get it on Amazon. It's a Kindle edition also. And at the moment, I'm recording an audio version. So all the stories in the eighth house will be, read by me. And this for me was really interesting because I thought oftentimes, did I write that? Wow, it was mind-blowing. However, did I, end up there? So my own journey into the eighth house, although I have spent, months and months and years collecting all that data and stuff and writing it first in German and then in English, it's still sometimes an enigma because Pandora's Box has so much to offer, and only at the bottom, like a teensy weensy corner, there is hope. And hope is such a small, tiny, insignificant word, isn't it? Hope, yeah, that's hopeful. Yeah, cheers, mate, thank you.
Sure, but I think hope is really the definition of the eighth house, right? You've got to get somebody else involved, because I was taught that hope means hearing other people's experiences. So yet again, we're drawn to, you're gonna feel pretty hopeless unless someone else gets involved with some solution or a gosh darn flashlight to help you, right? So if you're on your own, hope's going to be about this big, but get somebody else involved in your eighth house matters, and a little bit of light, I think, can come.
We are not in this alone.
Yeah, but we want to do eighth house stuff on our own, right? It's like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh hell, how's that figuring it out going?
Also, I mean, you mentioned crises, and oftentimes this is what brings us closer to our significant others after having seen somebody else through, or they have seen us through. The relationship surely has developed a new depth, a new richness, a new maturity, and that's, I mean, that's so precious, isn't it?
It is precious. And it's just, I've got 10,000 thoughts about that right now, but we better wrap up. And thank you again so much for coming. You guys, I will make sure that links to Martin's website, to the book, to all things Martin are in the description box or the show notes, depending on where you're listening, down below. But Martin, thank you so much again for the chat.
Thank you for having me. I had such fun. I mean, if fun is the right word for the eighth house, but I had it anyway.
we had an experience. How about that?
We did. I like that.
Yes, brilliant. All right, you guys, I love you a ton, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Stormie. Bye.